Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another exciting episode of How to Market Your Podcast the Simple Way.
This podcast is brought to you by Cowork.tools. Super simple onboarding for new members to your workplace. Cowork Tools sorts out your GDPR, your AML, and your KYC. There's even a collaborative payment platform. Of course, I know what all of that means. So stop messing around with your onboarding and get back to building your co-working community. Head to Cowork.tools to get started. Bye!
And I am genuinely excited. Obviously, I'm genuinely excited for all my guests, but I'm genuinely excited to have Debbie. I never say your name right. Ekins.
It's Ekins. Yeah.
Ekins.
Ekins.
In my luxury Ilford studio today. So Debbie, what are you known for, and what would you like to be known for?
Oh, well, I'm not really sure what I'm known for, but I am a content writer. So I help people write usually big five content around the Ask You Answer, and then I help them promote it so that more people see it.
Gee, Debbie, what's Big Five?
Well, the Big Five, as you'll probably know if you've listened to Marcus Sheridan's podcast already, it's the things that people generally search for, the topics that people generally search for, regardless of industry, before they purchase before they purchase anything. So it's usually cost, problems, best of class, comparisons, and reviews. Had a slight panic there. I thought I was going to get them wrong.
I always get them wrong. I always say I always say Big Five, and people go, "Gee, what's that, Bernie?" And
that?
I can only ever remember three. So we met in Chris Marr's amazing content marketing group, and we're in about 9 memberships together, like trying to save our businesses.
We are in a few, yes.
And most of those people have been on this podcast already. But when I first met you like 3 or 4 years ago in Content Marketing Academy.
I think we first met at World Class Communication 2017, maybe.
Oh my goodness, that's 100 years ago.
I think so.
And what I always thought was funny is you run your family run a hot tub company in Scotland, which I at first thought was a fiberglass swimming pool in Scotland, and maybe it is, and I've missed something. But I thought it always seemed in a very sensible way, and with his blessing, you copied what Marcus Sheridan did for the hot tub pool. Is that right?
Yeah, well, they do. They sell swimming pools, hot tubs, saunas, and steam rooms. So the fact that Marcus owns river pools and spas is kind of part of the reason that I fell into content marketing. I'd already been sort of doing it, but just really badly. And I was writing about just like awards and things basically that people weren't searching for. And then I kind of fell into it a couple of different ways. But one of the reasons that I fell into content marketing properly was because I was searching for things to do with pools, and I kept on coming across river pools and spas. And then kind of through a few different channels, ended up finding Marcus Sheridan, and then finding Chris Marr, and finding Cara, and then finding the CMA, the Content Marketing Academy, and that's when I properly started to do content marketing. So we didn't quite copy him. I think the businesses have both been around for about the same time. They were both Eagle Leisure was founded in 1989, but he certainly was a large part of the inspiration behind me starting content marketing. And when I first started doing it, everyone was saying, like, no one in this industry writes content. What have we got to write about? People just want to buy a hot tub, or they want to buy a swimming pool. And I think that he was an example of what could be done with content and the results that you could achieve by writing about all the things that people want to know. And of course, there's so many questions that people want to know about hot tubs and swimming pools and saunas and steam rooms, because it's usually a one-time purchase. It's usually something that you've never bought before. And so you have so many questions around, all those things that we mentioned, cost and problems and who's the best and that sort of thing. So yes, in a way, I did kind of copy him, but with his blessing, hopefully, because he did know that I was copying him.
I always thought he was very enthusiastic about because it is flattering when people take.
And I mean, there's no competition, is there? He's in America, we're over in Scotland, so yeah, I think he was okay with it, and obviously it was putting into practice something that he taught. So it was just proof again that it actually works, and it can work in any country, regardless of industry.
Well, there's a bit. I think he says in the podcast we have here, but he's definitely said it in the book. Is he went to after he had the success of like writing stuff on his website that wasn't I've just won Hackney Small Business of the Year Award 2011. He would go to conferences, which is the equivalent of someone who's had great success with content marketing and co-working, going to co-working Europe or going to co-working, co-living or co-working Spain and running an unconference and saying, this is exactly what I did to, blow up my membership and make loads of money. And here's what you would need to do. And he told people, and this was like 2014, and people, none of them did it. And now he's buying their companies.
And that's what I was like. That's exactly what I was about to say as you were saying that. The fact is that so many people know about content marketing. So many people probably know about the Ask You Answer, but very few companies fully implement it or fully embrace it as part of their culture. I think a lot of people will do some blogs here and there, or think that they're doing blogs, or think that they're doing content marketing. But I think that very few people are really properly implementing it in the way that Marcus teaches. And he probably knows that, but it's a shame because he is going out and giving all of the information so freely, and it has been proven to work with so many different companies in so many different industries. But it's not easy to implement it. It's not the easiest thing to continually implement the Ask You Answer strategy across your company, and so lots of people won't do it, even though the opportunity is there.
Well, there's one little thing to shout out, and then we'll get to why it isn't easy, because it is a really good thing to do, but it isn't easy. But if most things that are worth doing aren't a flick of a switch, is JJ Peterson, who's part of the Story brand thing, did his whole dissertation in how Story works when in marketing, and does it work on any product? And he was trying to think: is it just the people who are lucky that it works, or is it a particular type? Is it software or cars or fridges? And what he found out is, after all this research at a PhD level, it was a PhD thesis, was the only differentiator about Story and whether it works or not in marketing is whether you actually do anything. So it wasn't like if you have HubSpot over Marketo, or use MailChimp over ConvertKit, or you're in Edinburgh or London. It's just whether you can actually be bothered to go through the pain and agony of implementing it. So why, I know it's hard. And I don't think people want to listen to me whining. But, why is it hard to, like, you're in your family company and you're going, I'm going to do some of this content marketing stuff I've just discovered. And one of the reasons I really want to speak to you about this today is, for the last decade, every time I've said to a co-working space operator, we should do some content, and they run in the other direction and throw themselves over a cliff, because that's easier than writing 750 words on their website that might get them business. So what is tough, and how did you overcome that?
Well, I think that one of the first things that's challenging about it is that unless you're the owner of like a business that's just you, then there's usually other people to convince within that business that content marketing is a good idea. And sometimes, especially in the kind of situation that I was in with Eagle Leisure, with an older established business, it's really difficult to get out of that pattern of, well, we've always done it this way and it's always worked. And Eagle Leisure it wasn't an unsuccessful business. It wasn't failing. It just could have done better. So I think to get people to get on board with something that is a shift or a change in the company that's not necessarily necessary is quite difficult. But I also think that it kind of goes against a lot of instincts that people have learned in business, because you're putting yourself in the customer's shoes and you're giving them the answers that they want to the problems that you might not want to discuss. So, a kind of common one is that people don't want to discuss the problems in their industry, or they don't want to discuss competitors in their industry, because then that addresses them and then people know about them. But the reality is that people already know that there's problems in your industry, or they already know that you have competitors, and they already know who those competitors are, and they're already doing the searching for themselves. So if you don't give them the answers, they'll probably find the answers somewhere else. And whoever answers those questions is probably going to get their trust. So I think it kind of goes against a lot of what people want to talk about in business. People just want to talk about the good things, and they want to talk about how great they are, but that's not really what the customer wants to hear most of the time. They want to know how it's going to help them. So I think that makes it quite difficult to get buy-in from the beginning and to get people on board. And then in general, it's just difficult to stay consistent unless you have someone dedicated within the company that is, going to be in charge of deciding what you're going to write about and creating a strategy and writing that content, and then maybe doing videos and podcasts and everything else that goes with that. Then it can be a lot of work and it can be difficult to stay consistent. But that's where, like, as we know, things like other marketing groups that bring in accountability and things like that can be helpful, because it is possible. It's just daunting, I guess, and it can seem like, as you say, the thought of putting on like a blog a week for the next year can seem like such a big challenge. But once you actually start writing the blogs, and once you understand what you're writing about and why you're writing about it, it's not that difficult. You know your product better than anyone else, so you should be able to write about it, or you should be able to get somebody else to write about it. And once you start seeing the results that can happen as a result of this content, then you're instantly bought in, and it seems like the most obvious thing in the world. Why would you not have done this before? Why would you not have looked at it from a consumer's perspective before? So it's not easy, but it's definitely worth it once you get into it.
How did you decide what type of? I get asked this a lot. The ultimate, they ask, you answer. How did you decide what type of content to do? Like at Eagle Leisure, and then with other people you work with. Is it like?
Well, for Eagle Leisure, once I knew what the Ask You Answer was, and I was lucky enough to learn what the Ask You Answer was directly from Marcus at a video workshop. So I went home and I bought the book. I read the entire book, and then I joined CMA shortly after that. And I think how I started was that in the workshop we'd written down 10 ideas, the 10 most common questions that customers asked. And then I think Chris had a kind of email sequence that challenged you to come up with 50 of the most common questions that customers asked. And from that, I just created a content strategy. I didn't particularly go at it in any order. I just knew that those were the most common questions that customers were asking, and they were the ones that I tackled first. And once you start thinking about questions that customers ask, you'll probably have way more than 50. I know that I did, and I think there's about at least a couple of hundred blogs on there now, and they all cover questions that are either things that people ask before the process or asked during the buying process, or sometimes need information on after the buying process. And yeah, it's just, once you start, it's really difficult to stop to stop thinking of questions that can come off of those.
It definitely is. There's something I've referenced a lot. There's a guy called Jonathan Stark who writes an email. He sends an email every day. And I was in a workshop with him, and I was like, oh, and he was like, he just mentioned, a little bit like we're talking here about creating content, and everyone was like, oh my God, Jonathan, you're so amazing. How do you write an email every day? And he's like, because when you sit down, you talk a lot. The first bit you talk a lot of rubbish because you're so excited about emailing every day. And then you realize that you've run out of rubbish ideas and all the good ones start flowing in. And then suddenly you just never run out of ideas.
Yeah.
And
I do think there's truth to that, because some of the ones that I started with, I mean, they were good questions, and they were questions that people asked. But from that, then more questions would come. Like, I'm trying to think of an example. Like, if we're talking about how much a sauna costs, but then like, what electrical point do you need from that? Do we install that? Like, all these questions that would lead from one to the next. And you kind of have to go down the train of thought of what would the customer be asking at this point. So if they've searched initially for something like price, what is the next question that they're going to have after that? And from one idea, you get branches of so many different ideas that end up coming off of that, because there's going to be more questions naturally that lead on from that.
I think this is like really pertinent for like a co-working space, because when I go to, And there's definitely people out there doing this. And obviously, I'm only focused on the ones that don't. But it's like, so when I get there, I'm going to like walk in the door. Is there a good coffee shop nearby? Because it's all over if I can't get a good espresso. I might not need it every day. And is there a shower there for riding my bike? There's all these things that like I might not want to do, but I just want to know that I could do them in case I needed to do them. Is it noisy? Is it next to a school? Can I get, like shops there, public transport, who's in the building, are they like, fire eaters, or are they, programmers? And there's all these things that help me move me towards making a buying decision. But most things, I'm generalizing here, folks, sorry, but say 10 best software products for freelancers, which is kind of a bit of attraction content, but doesn't help me towards a buying decision on whether I'm going to give you, in London, £300 a month to sit in your building.
Yeah. And I think what you mentioned there as well about, there's loads of things that you might not actually need to know the answer to. And I think it's important as well that your customers don't always know what they need to know, especially if it's if I was brand new to a co-working space, I'd never been to one before, I don't know what to expect. I don't know what I need to know. And therefore you need to create content around that. And the same with Ego Leisure. There was loads of stuff that people thought was important. For example, there's a blog that I did on how many pumps and jets do you need for a hot tub, and that's one thing that people think is really important. But actually, the blog was all about how that wasn't the most important thing and what you really needed to look for. And there'll be examples of that in every industry. Looking at, and I'm sure like kind of Lindsay will have talked about this from Jammy Digital or Martin. Like it's your job to create the content so that you get the right customers for yourself and for your business. But yeah, they don't always know what they need to know. So it's kind of your job to create content based on the questions that they ask, but also based on the things that are related to that will be important for their purchase that they don't know yet.
There's a great book, I'll put a link in the show notes, called The Mum Test, which is by a guy called, it's Rob Fitzpatrick, I think. And it's, at the beginning example is, it's about asking questions in the way you've just set out there. And at the beginning, he says his mum has an iPad, and he says to his mum, would you like a recipe app for your iPad? And she says yes. And then he goes, and then I could go off and make an iPad app, but I don't know what she really wants. So then I ask her again, oh, how do you get recipes? Who gives you your recipes? Do you look for cookbooks? And it turns out that her friends write recipes on a bit of paper and give it to her, and then she folds it into a very old recipe book, and that's how she gets them. And she's not looking for another lasagna recipe on an app. And then, so he would have gone off and, spent $50,000 making this app, and she wouldn't have ever used it, let alone paid for it. And, the level of excitement, because we all think, this is what people need. And once you start the inconvenience of asking questions, you find out it's a very different thing. One of the things I want to ask, which, because I get asked all the time, is about how much do people, because I'll set it up even more, is I've worked with at least 3 co-working spaces that give around £500 a month to an SEO company, who at some point then comes back and says, and I'm not saying you have to have your website set up properly for SEO and know what to do. Yeah. And after about usually 3 to 6 months of giving this company SEO money for SEO, they come back and say, well, what you need is some content on your website to build authority. So they've quite happily taken the money, and then they go, oh, by the way, you need this. So and my argument is, and I know it'd be awkward for me, but you can disagree, is rather than spending £500 on SEO, is to spend that money on regular articles or videos or whatever it is on your website. So if I had £500, how many blogs would I get for that? Or what should people pay? Because that's the question people really want to know, is like, is it $15 an hour, $15 an article off of Fiverr, or is it $300 an hour from Bernie and Debbie?
Yeah, well, I am obviously a wee bit biased, but I do agree with you. Obviously I think SEO is important, but SEO is a massive part of a content marketing strategy, and that's something that you're going to build if you create regular content. And I've been in the position before where, with Eagle Leisure before I started, that they were paying thousands of pounds a month to advertising agencies and Google ads and SEO agencies, with really no return because they had zero content on their website. At this point, we didn't even have the new website. So sorry, that's kind of the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, you mentioned things like Fiverr and Upwork there, and I'm sure that they provide blog writing services for much cheaper. I honestly don't even know how much they are, because that's kind of not the kind of industry that I am in. But I would say that for most content writers that I know that are creating content around sort of search topics that we've talked about, you're looking at somewhere between £150 to £200 for an article generally, which does seem like a lot, but when you compare it to, for example, people paying out £500 a month for SEO and not really getting any return, I personally think it's a much more sustainable investment to put your money in, and it's also an asset, so you own it. So that blog or that video or whatever it is will be on your website forever, or for as long as you want to keep it there. And you might put it on now and you might make some sales from it, but you also equally might make sales in a year's time or 2 years' time or 3 years' time, because that content is always there. It's always available online 24/7, and it can always be found.
Yep. I have the most traffic to article on my site, which is nice, but doesn't really serve what I'm doing now, is how to connect Trello to Slack. And that's from 2014. And 6 years later, that is still what is it when traffic just comes to your site by magic? Is it organic search or?
Organic, yeah. I think so. Yeah, and I think that's also a really important thing to mention, that what is your most trafficked article is not always your best converting article. So for example, with Eagle Leisure, they build saunas as part of their business, and saunas are much less popular than hot tubs. Well, it's definitely in Scotland and the rest of the UK anyway. So they get much less search traffic towards them because much less people are searching for them. But we've had so many conversions from one video, which is how much does a sauna cost, worth, tens of 20, I don't know how many tens of thousands of pounds, from that one article, even though there's, like a couple of hundred views on it on YouTube in comparison to 15-20,000 views on some of the ones about hot tubs. So it's important to remember that you need to think about the questions that your customers will be asking, and not just what's going to get the most traffic, but what's actually going to move them down the sales process.
Definitely, because that Trello article does not move people down my sales process.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's good still to have a lot of organic traffic onto your website, and you will get articles like that just bring lots of people in. And I'm not saying don't do them, absolutely do. But it's also important to remember that sometimes the ones that aren't seemingly performing as well are probably actually converting pretty well.
Ace. Listen, we're gonna wrap up there. Just before we go, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a post that Debbie wrote for me, because I'm absolutely incapable of doing it on myself. I can tell people how they could do this, but it's a comparison of Office R&D, Cobot, and Nexodus, and it has Fiona and Hector and Shabad, who, if you're in London, a lot of you folks know, and that's an example of Debbie's work, and that is I did that article because it is a big five thing. People are always asking me for the last 6 years at conferences. People have said, "Oh, what software do you think's best?" And I kind of know what I think's best, but I couldn't do a comprehensive review, and that is an example of A, Debbie's work, and B, the kind of article that will really, really help people and answer their questions. So thank you very much for that. Where can we find you online?
You can go to debbieekins.com. That's EKINS for Ekins, or LinkedIn is Debbie Ekins also. Or if you want to follow my hill walking adventures, it's Debbie_does_things on Instagram. But that's all hill walking pictures, not anything to do with business.
And not for people with vertigo. Really appreciate your time today. Thanks very much. Thank you very much for your time today. As a co-working space owner or manager, you may never know where to start with your marketing, even if you know exactly what needs to be done. Are you always stopping and starting communication for your co-working space? Get distracted by shiny things and new fads? Do you blog once a year and not even know why you're blogging? If you're like me, you've read hundreds of books on business and marketing, but still get stuck in action. How often have you done the same thing 12 weeks in a row? Head to berniejmitchell.com and hit the green book a call button to spend a few hours with me to nail a simple 90-day marketing plan you will actually execute on. We'll work out a 12-week plan of content, emails, and other actions to build your sales funnel. I'm 100% confident I can help you. So confident, in fact, I'll give you your money back right on the spot at the end of our call if you don't find our time together useful. In the last decade, I've helped hundreds of people get clear on where to go next, what tools to use, and how to stay consistent with their marketing. Head to berniejmitchell.com and book a call today.